in the quiet hills of Bethlehem, where the grass bent low under the weight of morning dew and the air smelled of sheep and wild herbs, there lived a young boy named David, the youngest son of Jesse, while his older brothers trained for war and stood tall in the sight of men. David spent his days in solitude, watching over his father's flock. To many, he was invisible. To God, he was being shaped. David learned patience under the open sky. He learned courage when lions crept from the shadows and bears charged toward the flock. With only a sling and a shepherd's staff, he defended the sheep not because anyone was watching, but because it was his duty. In those lonely fields, David sang songs to God, pouring his heart into melodies that rose with the wind. These songs would later become the Psalms, prayers born from trust, fear, joy, and deep faith. God chooses the unlikely. At that time, Israel had a King Saul, tall, strong, and impressive to the people. But Saul's heart had drifted from obedience to God, so the Lord sent the prophet Samuel to Bethlehem with a secret mission to anoint a new king. Jesse presented his sons, one by one strong warriors, confident men, but God rejected them all. Finally, Samuel asked, "Are these all your sons?" Jesse hesitated. "There is still the youngest," he said, "but he is keeping the sheep." When David was brought in, sunburnt and youthful, God spoke clearly, "Arise, anoint him, for this is the one." Oil was poured over David's head, and though no crown was placed upon him that day, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David with power. From that moment, his destiny was sealed, but his journey had only begun. David and Goliath. Not long after, Israel faced a terrifying enemy. The Philistines had a champion named Goliath, a giant warrior who mocked Israel and defied the God of heaven. For 40 days, he stood shouting challenges, and even King Saul trembled in fear. David came to the battlefield, only to bring food to his brothers. But when he heard Goliath's insults, something stirred within him. While others saw a giant, David saw an insult against God. "You come to me with sword and spear," David declared boldly, "but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." Armed with only a sling and 5 smooth stones, David ran toward the giant. One stone flew through the air, struck Goliath's forehead, and the giant fell. That day, faith defeated fear, and a shepherd boy became a hero of Israel. David and Saul, love, jealousy, and betrayal. David was welcomed into Saul's court, where his music soothed the king's troubled spirit. The people loved David. Songs were sung in the streets. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Those words planted jealousy in Saul's heart. Fear turned into rage. Rage turned into hatred. Saul tried to kill David multiple times, throwing spears at him and plotting his death. Yet David refused to raise his hand against Saul, saying, "I will not touch the Lord's anointed."
Eventually, Saul died in battle, and David mourned him sincerely. After years of waiting, David was finally crowned king of Israel. He captured Jerusalem and made it his capital. Under his leadership, Israel grew strong, united, and respected among nations. David desired to build a house for God, but the Lord told him that his son would build the temple instead. Still, God made David a powerful promise. His throne would endure forever, a promise fulfilled ultimately through Jesus Christ, the Son of David, David's greatest failure. Despite his faith, David was not without sin. One tragic night, he saw Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, and gave in to desire. His sin led to deception and murder. When confronted by the prophet Nathan, David broke down in repentance. "Create in me a clean heart, O God," he cried. Though forgiven, David faced painful consequences. His household was marked by conflict, betrayal, and grief. Yet even in failure, David clung to God, not hiding his brokenness, but surrendering it, the legacy of a man after God's heart. David ruled for 40 years. He was a warrior, a poet, a king, a sinner, and a worshiper. His life proved that God does not choose the perfect, but perfects those who trust Him. When David died, he left behind more than a kingdom. He left a legacy of faith, worship, repentance, and hope. From his line would come the Messiah, the true king whose kingdom would never end. And so the story of David reminds us, God sees the heart, God uses the unlikely, God redeems the broken, from shepherd fields to a royal throne. David's life is a testimony that faith can turn ordinary, lives into eternal stories. The sun rose gently over Jerusalem, casting golden light upon the rooftops of the city David loved. Yet inside the palace, the air was heavy. For the great king of Israel had grown old, the man who once ran through valleys with a sling in his hand and praise on his lips now lay wrapped in blankets, his strength fading like a lamp at dawn. King David, son of Jesse, shepherd of Bethlehem, slayer of Goliath, warrior of Israel, and psalmist of God, had reached the end of his days. Though many servants surrounded him, warmth no longer stayed in his bones. Physicians came and went, whispering among themselves, but age had claimed him. They brought Abishag the Shunammite to attend to him, to lie beside him, and care for him. Yet even her presence could not restore the vigor that once made nations tremble. David knew, his spirit knew, his time was near, a kingdom in tension. As David weakened, the palace stirred with quiet unrest. Adnisha, one of David's sons, ambitious and proud, exalted himself and declared, "I will be king." He gathered chariots, horsemen, and supporters, preparing to seize the throne before his father's breath had left him. But the Lord had already spoken. Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, came swiftly before the aged king. They bowed low and reminded him of his promise that Solomon, born of God's choosing, would reign after him. David's eyes, dim with age, suddenly burned with clarity. Call Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah, he commanded, his voice thin yet firm. "Let Solomon ride on my mule, anoint him king over Israel." And so it was done. Trumpets sounded, the people rejoiced, and Solomon was crowned while David yet lived. Peace returned to the palace, not the peace of strength, but the peace of fulfillment. A father's final charge. One quiet evening, David asked that Solomon be brought to him. The young prince knelt beside the bed where the old king lay, his breath slow and deliberate. David reached out, his hand trembling, and rested it upon his son's head. "I am going the way of all the earth," David said softly. "Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walk in his ways. Keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments." His voice paused, then deepened with memory. "You know my life, Solomon. The victories and the failures. I have sinned and I have repented. But the Lord is faithful. Serve him with a whole heart, and he will establish your kingdom." Solomon's eyes filled with tears. "I will remember my father," he whispered. David smiled faintly. Reflections of a shepherd king. That night, as lamps flickered low, David's thoughts drifted far from the palace too. Green pastures and quiet streams. He remembered tending sheep beneath open skies, singing to God with no crown upon his head. He remembered the roar of Goliath and the silence after the stone struck true. He remembered Saul's jealousy and God's protection.
As dawn approached, David's breathing grew shallow. The servants noticed the change and fell silent. Solomon stood nearby. Nathan bowed his head. No cries filled the room, only awe. David lifted his eyes one last time. "Into your hands, O Lord," he murmured. And then the king slept. No thunder sounded, no fire fell, but heaven received a soul after God's own heart. David, king of Israel, died in peace. Mourning and honor. The city mourned deeply. Warriors wept for the man who led them. Priests honored the king who loved God's presence. Musicians sang psalms he had written with tears and joy. He was buried in the city of David, among his fathers. He had reigned 40 years, 7 in Hebron, 33 in Jerusalem. He left behind not only a throne, but a legacy of worship, repentance, courage, and faith. a legacy that did not die. Though David's body returned to the dust, his voice did not fade. His psalms continued to rise from the lips of the faithful. His lineage carried the promise of the Messiah. His story reminded generations that God does not seek perfection, but a heart that returns to Him. And long after the palace walls crumbled, the words still echoed, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Thus ended the life of King David, but not his song.